This
250,000.
conference will now be recorded.
And death toll that's is also rising as well. So common symptoms of COVID-19, this is according to the CDC directly. So it can range from asymptomatic, mild symptoms to severe illness, even death. And those symptoms can incubate for about 2 to 14 days, with an average being about 5 days. So incubate, for those who don't know, is essentially you have contracted the virus and you don't have any symptoms yet, but it's still contagious, it can spread. So the most common symptoms, according to CDC, are fever, cough, and shortness of breath. So when to seek medical attention, again, according to the CDC, here's some of the warning signs to get immediate help. Is if you have trouble breathing, if you have persistent pain or pressure in your chest, new confusion or inability to arouse, and bluish lips or face. But those are not inclusive, right? So contacting your local medical provider with any other symptoms that seem very concerning or severe is important to contact out. Now kind of getting right into the meat of what my presentation here is about anxiety related to COVID-19. And before I get directly into the specific domains, I just want to give a brief description of what anxiety is according to, for our general audience here. So according to the American Psychological Association, the very bare bone definition of anxiety is an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worry thoughts, and physical change. And then I took it a step further and added 4 mechanisms of how anxiety kind of manifests for us. And those include physical, the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral anxiety. And I'm just going to very briefly talk about each one. So the physical anxiety is really just the sensory experience of anxiety that rests in our bodies. And some of those experiences, or some of those include shortness of breath or feeling of choking, can be sweaty palms, a racing heart, chest pain or discomfort, a feeling of restlessness, so feeling keyed up or on edge. And then I'm going to go into the emotional, which is, I guess, probably the most ubiquitous form of how we think of anxiety, right? It's our feelings, our emotions surrounding it. And that includes, so fear or terror, right? Worry, nervousness, feeling overwhelmed, any kind of panic, uneasiness, and maybe jumpiness or edginess. And then we go into the cognitive side of anxiety, which is really the aversive thoughts related to the fears and the worries. And some of those thought examples can include, I just put like sentences for them, is what if blank happens, right? What if something happens? I must have certainty, right? When will this end? Will I or my loved ones be okay? I am going crazy, and this isn't that bad. So people who tend to minimize or maybe deny some of the realities of what's going on. And then we'll go into the last one of the mechanisms of behavioral. And this essentially is the manifestation of those physical, emotional, and cognitive or thought symptoms with anxiety. And just for some very, couple of examples that can range are maybe avoidance of a particular situation. Could be denial, so you're denying what's actually happening. Could be procrastination, so feeling unproductive. Could be attention difficulties. This could be a manifestation. You have inability to concentrate, which is pretty common for a lot of people right now. Overly attached or more isolated to somebody, and people engaging in riskier activities. So that is, in a nutshell, just very briefly, 4, I think, internal mechanisms or the mechanisms of anxiety that I wanted to touch on. And with that said, we'll now kind of get right into it. So I've created this anxiety pie chart, as I call it, and I've listed 8 different environmental and societal factors that seem most related to COVID-19 right now. And the purpose of this pie chart is for a few reasons here. Number 1 is just to provide everyone an easy visual to identify which areas seem to cause us the most anxiety for us at a particular given time. Increasing self-awareness of where our anxieties are most prevalent in order to have working functionality with them. The idea is that if we can identify these particular areas, then it can reduce the burden that all the areas of anxiety are not omnipresent and constant. And the other part of this is to be when we know these anxieties, we can be more adaptable to the fluidity of our anxiety areas, and then have those coping strategies readily available on hand. So here is the pie chart that I created. So I'm going to just say it out loud, the 8 different ones. I have quarantine, death, contracting the virus itself, basic sustenance, healthcare, the economy, closures, and media/leadership. I am going to go a little bit more in depth of every single one of these domains that I've created. And after I do that, I will bring this graph up again, and I want all of us who are watching to try to engage in some kind of exercise that is going to make this very personal and close to us to understand for ourselves what's most pressing for us. So I should say, before I get right into it, some of these anxieties I'm going to be discussing, it is a bit grim, right? There's realities that are difficult to hear these things, and I think it's important, though, that we understand the depth of what is actually out there in order for us to heal. In order to heal, you have to deal with the difficulty. To just try to say that things are okay and everything's, inshallah, going to be safe and I feel fine, that may not be the case for most people. So we have to get to the difficulty in order to be able to see the light, inshallah. So I want to just preface that first, and then we will have those coping strategies in place. So without further ado, we'll go into the first slice of the pie, so to speak. I talk about death. So this can be perhaps a lot of people's greatest existential threat, right? That could happen with this COVID-19. And the fear of death can include yourself, your family, your friends, frontline health workers, community members, some people say celebrities, other, depends on who it's applying for. Talk about exponential growth, right? So as we currently speak, the numbers are rising in the US, and they don't seem to be slowing down for a little while. So this is something that's currently happening and fast. We see higher mortality rates for older populations, 80 plus, and those with any pre-existing conditions, but there have been more reports of deaths of younger individuals as well. It is considered by the health and infectious disease experts say that it's about 10 times deadlier than the flu. And the White House task force just a couple days ago estimated a very staggering number of people that could die from this, between 100 and 240,000 people, even with all of the current measures in place. So this is, something very, very serious here. Yes, so the next piece of the pie that I discuss is contracting COVID-19, the virus itself. Again, this can apply for those who, for yourself, can apply for family and friends, healthcare workers, and again, I said celebrities. When was it Tom Hanks got it, a lot of people freaked out about that and said that it's not immune from anyone. So just something to think about. So the congressional doctor stated that between 70 to 150 million Americans will contract it. So other estimates said higher, so roughly about half of the American population. And more tests are available now, which has validated this massive spike of cases, right? It's still heavily underreported because not everyone is getting tested, but as the more tests become available and more people become sick, we're gonna see the numbers spike. It is highly contagious, right? So it's 3 times easier to transmit than the flu. And the incubation period, which I mentioned in a previous slide, is anywhere from about 2 to 14 days, but the average being about 5 days of having it before symptoms develop. And there's a new report now that said according to the CDC, that about 1/4 of people who contract the virus maybe is asymptomatic, which means that they don't have any symptoms at all throughout the duration of having it, which is good for the 1/4, but the other 3/4, they can still pass that on to those other 3/4 of the people. So something just to be mindful of, that it varies in its nature and its ability to affect people. Another stat by the CDC said that about 40% of people are hospitalized between the ages of 20 to 54, which I think the myth that if you're young, this can't affect you, and that's absolutely not true. So it is something to be mindful of, and important that we take these social distancing measures quite seriously. And again, 65 plus and older are higher risk, and the older you are, the higher risk for severe illness. And like I said earlier, 80 and above is probably the highest risk. And all of this virus itself is just kind of led to an increased paranoia in public, right? There's excessive cleaning going on. People are reversed, don't want to go to the stores, and understandably so. So this has led to a lot of different confusion, and this thing is kind of developing rather fast. The next slice of the pie, so to speak, that I will talk about is healthcare. And when I'm talking about healthcare, I'm going to talk about two things, healthcare scarcity and then healthcare costs. But let's begin with the scarcity. So there is the concern that we've heard this idea, this very popular hashtag flatten the curve. If no one's heard of that, that essentially is saying that it's important for us as the US citizens, as public, and just the general population, is that we do not want to overpopulate the hospitals all at once. So the idea that is, we're not going to try to eliminate this virus right now, but if we can postpone the number of people being sick, severely sick and infected, it will not overtax and overburden the current healthcare system and the hospitals and the physicians and the nurses and the rest of the healthcare workers. So it is our duty as citizens to try to flatten this curve and allow this course to run with not getting sick, as many people as we can to prevent from getting sick. Healthcare workers are contracting the virus as well. They're the frontline workers. Alhamdulillah, God bless them for being there and taking care of everyday people, and they don't know who comes in that room, and they're ready to take care of people, but they're also contracting it as well. A lot of them are. And a big reason for that as well is that there's PPE shortages, right? So personal protective equipment shortages of gloves, of masks, of gown, the basic way to just kind of sterilize themselves. It's been a shortage, especially in cities like New York, which is overflooded with coronavirus cases. One of my very, very dear friends is an ER doctor in New York, and I just had a discussion with him the other night about this. This is a real problem, and it needs to be taken quite seriously to improve that. Another thing, the medical supplies and amenities, there's some shortages, right? The ventilators, shortage of hospital beds. I'll stick with the ventilators, is that if we don't have enough of these ventilators, then people are being medically triaged to see who gets what first, versus everyone being able to get kind of the amenities all at once to be taken care of. So we're in a short supply of that as well. Testing kits, as I mentioned a bit earlier, there is a shortage of testing kits, and they are becoming more readily available, but still very much needing more. Briefly talk about healthcare costs. So when we look at healthcare costs, the testing is now free for COVID-19, but just a couple weeks ago, it wasn't. And the prices were quite pricey to get it, ranging anywhere from above $1,300 on. And the cost of treatment without healthcare, even now, so the treatment itself, not getting tested, can still cost tens of thousands of dollars for many people. And those, even with healthcare, for one-night stays in the hospital for pneumonia or other complications, can still cost in the thousands. So that is a big barrier, and that is something that needs to be improved as well. Okay, basic sustenance is the next piece of the pie. And I will get right into it. So there's concern for people for water or food shortages. I say that people kind of go into primitive survival mode when this pandemic really escalated, and we heard from our frontline leaders, our leadership at the top, making this a big national emergency, which rightfully so, and putting bans across countries, and people kind of got freaked out. Non-perishable foods remain empty from the shelves. I call that, when we see this at the store, when people are running around trying to get food or some kind of cleaning amenity and nothing's available, I call it the Costco effect. It seems to induce panic in other people. And I noticed in myself personally a couple weeks ago when I went to the store, just before Trump had announced that there was a European travel ban going on. And I didn't see toilet paper, I didn't see water, I didn't see rice. And there was talk about the 4 mechanisms of anxiety picking up for me. I noticed myself feeling a bit more rushed, a bit more alert in the store, and having a bit more concern that I should be more concerned than I actually am. Is this something more serious than I don't know? And I think that this is a collective panic that seems to happen to many people. Another concern about this is the duration and uncertainty. So how much do we need to buy? How much food do we need to get? For how long? And then I also put the cleaning amenity scarcity, right? We've heard time and time again that the best thing to do is to be sterile as possible, wash your hands with soap, have sanitizer if possible, and those are also remaining empty from the shelves oftentimes. So it's finding ways to say, how do we get the actual supplies that we need for our own safety and for our own families to be healthy. And I say another thing, what happens with basic sustenance often is that when there's a grim message from the leadership, right? So like I said, when Trump gave that speech about the European travel ban, we saw a spike in shortages for many goods for prolonged periods of time. And very similarly, a couple days ago, when they talked about the staggering death toll numbers, there was another spike in shortages of food and water and other basic amenities at the grocery stores. Something to keep in mind. So the economy is a very big one. I don't know if I can cover it comprehensively, but I did pick apart a few main components that I think are important to talk about. And those include layoffs and unemployment. So if we can see right now, many non-essential industries have closed, are severely reduced in business. There was a stat that I saw recently that said about 1 in 5 people have lost their job in the US, and even more so for the ones who are making less money, under $50,000, about 1 in 4. And we can just see what happened yesterday. The report came out that it was the largest filing for unemployment in the history of the United States, right? And it doubled last week's record of 3.3 million, which was about 10 times more than the previous record in the history of the US. So this is something that is very unprecedented, and we are trying to monitor it day by day. This is going to continue to rise, so something to be very mindful of. Look at the economic recovery plan, which is a good thing that the government and the Congress has passed this bill, but sometimes people are saying it's not enough, right? So currently we have a one-time payment for anyone that's making roughly under $100,000. So unemployment benefits, those are expected to kick into gear. People don't know when and how fast. And then there's also this idea that we need to try to figure out a freeze on mortgages, rents, loans, right? And that may not still be enough for people. So how do we kind of navigate this as well? People are just, like I said, need a swifter and more comprehensive action needed. And it seems like the White House task force is actually looking for ways to create and discussions about what could potentially continue helping out those who have been devastated by the unemployment and layoffs. Oh, sorry about this. Okay, economy continued. I also put retirement and savings. So we see that people, there's 401k, their retirement plans have massive dips. Savings are being used up quickly, and long-term financial security for many people is in question, unfortunately. And then the stock market, right? This is extremely volatile, right? It's fluctuated up and down all month, all the past month. And people are making unstable investments, trying to predict what's going to happen. And many economists do anticipate a deep recession and possibly a depression. So these are just some of the things that I'm mentioning here for the economy. And some of them will tie actually a little bit to the closures as well. So talking about closures, many of us are affected by this. It's impossible not to be. School closures, spiritual institutions, restaurants, gyms, world events, other non-essential businesses, social gatherings kind of been forced to a halt. So I'm going to begin just a little bit with school closures, right? We see 55 million students have been forced out of school, leaving parents and caretakers left to scramble of really how to provide. And some of those things that are left to provide with is figuring out how to take care of childcare, right? It takes time to find someone who can take care of your kids. It can cost money, and really the safety. I mean, this is a big thing about not very many people are willing or want to watch other people's kids right now with the virus, especially with these strict quarantine, social distancing measures put in place. And as well, many people who relied on free subsidized lunches aren't able to have those anymore because schools is effectively closed for them for the foreseeable future. We see non-essential procedures and non-essential businesses also being closed as well. So non-emergency surgeries and operations have been halted. I know even at dentist offices, those who are trying to get a filling filled, good luck. Unless it's something serious like a root canal or something that's very painful, then it's being held off. We see a massive decrease in production and consumer spending in many industries, right? Restaurants, salons, gyms. And I put world events that we've seen closed, like the NBA started this, and a trend of all these professional sports and world-class sports and concerts have been shut down. And then I put several distinct features of these closures that we can kind of look at. Is the heightened sense of collective panic, right? We see this been extremely abrupt, right? It just seemed to kind of happen overnight for many people. Increasingly stricter measures and guidelines once that abruptness began, and now it's just kind of prolonging and getting a little bit more intense. And there's an unknown duration, right? I think people are trying to guess how long this is going to be, and we just don't know yet. And I say with these closures, identities have shifted, and I'll talk more about this in the quarantine slice, but just important to be aware of that, there's new roles and dynamics happening right now for everyone. And that includes parents, caretakers expected to teach homeschool, be full-time parents. We see people working from home, trying to establish a new routine. people who are unemployed. So now people who are kind of in the house and don't have a job and have lost that identity of what they used to do. Another one that could also happen for a lot of people is protective factors may have decreased. So we can see a loss of physical community, right? So your friends, your spiritual networks, your school, work, social distancing, right? That has led to further alienation from others. We see unhealthier lifestyles for many people. This can be, exercise and movement options have kind of reduced. So gyms have been closed across the country. In some states in California, I know a lot of the walking trails have been closed, nature trails blocked off. And people are eating more and just moving less. So I'm moving kind of fast here. And I just want to take a quick second to say, if you notice anything coming up for you as I'm speaking about this, pay attention to those internal mechanisms about what's coming up, because this is bringing up a lot of different facts. It could bring up a lot of fear and concern, but it's important to be able to recognize what is happening for you as I'm talking about this. And I want us to keep a perspective, because I think it is important that we can get really overwhelmed by it, but just kind of slowing down as I'm going through it. And I'm really going to use these the next half of my lecture to really kind of bring this to a more grounding place. Like I said, I think right now we're just kind of I'm just kind of going through. So just check in with yourself as I'm talking about these things. So the media, another slice of the anxiety COVID-19 pie. I put coverage is COVID-19 all day, every day, right? We cannot avoid it. It is the first thing on our news, on our social media. It's impossible to ignore. Generally, the messages are pretty grim. We see death tolls numbers soaring, hospitals being overtaxed. No one really knows the duration of time. So this is also repeatedly in our face. And the news is on repeated cycle, with only the difference that they have constantly breaking alerts. So it's usually some bad news with topped and more bad news, right? We see this over and over. And the reality is that this will be the topic discussed for the foreseeable future. So it's not going anywhere right now. We see a lot of false news and misinformation being put out there, right? And some of those include different myths, like people saying it's like the flu. We see, the virus duration, people think it's how long it's going to last for, vaccination timelines, cures, conspiracies, self-proclaimed experts. Really try to avoid all this false news and misinformation, because this is actually only heightening people's anxiety, unnecessarily so. So I will provide some very trusted, I think, valid sources at the end of this to help, inshallah, clear some of those concerns. Leadership. So leadership in our country starts from the top down. So president down, and this has been a source of anxiety for many people. So just in general, we had as the US collectively had a delayed response to the origin of the crisis. We can look at the South Korea versus US containment strategies, which are highly different, and their first confirmed cases were both on the exact same day, on January 20th, but very different approaches to how to go about dealing with the problem. I say vacillating and inconsistent messages has been kind of a pretty presenting concern. And with vacillating and inconsistent messages, oftentimes can generate confusion, which reduces trust. So we've seen the president downplaying severity and at times providing false senses of security. We've heard him say nothing to worry about. It's a democratic hoax. It's like the flu. The numbers will be eliminated in a 2-week quarantine. And then we've heard him say in his Oval Office addresses and his press briefings, a very heightened sense of panic and severity. So it flip-flops. And I think that hearing those messages being mixed causes more panic and confusion. So that idea of declaring national emergency, the travel bans, extending quarantines, we don't exactly know. I think it's important that we make sure that we're getting competent sources, competent information, because with incompetence can lead to feeling unprepared and failing to act swiftly and efficiently. And we've seen this with when you fail to act swiftly and efficiently, that can have a reduced number of tests, PPE shortages, hospital beds, not declaring a national shutdown, which many people believe is the appropriate measure to take at this point for most people. As well, we've seen the president's way versus the health experts, kind of in this tug of war, so to speak. And we need to be more aligned on how we move forward with this crisis from the top. The last step I will talk about, the last piece of the pie, is the life of quarantine, which very many people, everyone is affected by this. And I'm going to go into some brief points about quarantine measures here. So number one, it's an undetermined amount of time, right? We don't know how long this is going to continue. It's become the new normal. And it's life changes that have been rather abrupt, right? So people are home a lot, right? Home a lot. We see people having cabin fever, so to speak, right? Feeling kind of irritated, just kind of built up just anger and frustration. People are working from home now. Most kids are homeschooled who were never homeschooled before. The social distancing is really a thing, and it's limiting personal interaction from people. And health workers are now, there's stories of health workers who still go to work and then are quarantining from their families in their own home, which is pretty hard to hear. But this is the new reality for many people. So it's a very difficult time for people to be at home or at work. Relational dynamics and distress. This is one that I think we don't often talk enough about, right? We see we have a significant amount of more time spent with our significant others, parents and children. And I think oftentimes that can be, alhamdulillah, a very good thing, but we can also romanticize this idea of what it means to spend time with each other all the time. Because for some people, it's not always a good thing. We can look across the world for different examples for that. We see that in divorce filings in China, when they were in lockdown or in their quarantine state, have increased. Divorce filings significantly increased when people left. So this is not always, like I said, a very safe thing for people. We also see that domestic violence calls and arrests have significantly spiked and are trending in the US right now across states. So school and going to work can be a place of comfort and safety for some. It's not always the safest place to be. So we're keeping those things in mind as well. Life in quarantine continued. Unpleasant symptoms may arrive from quarantine, not just the anxiety and concern and fear, but also depressive symptoms, right? And a large reason for why this could also lead to depressive symptoms is we no longer have a routine. We don't have our schedule. Some people are unemployed. Family could be a positive thing or a very distressing thing. People are in increased isolation. So about 1 in 4 people in the United States live actually alone. So they are now unable to join other people and be with them because they are kind of locked up in isolation. Could lead to more lethargic. People are going to bed later, waking up earlier, not knowing what day of the week it is. And then we say hopeless, right? So that people feel like this isn't going to end. I don't know when I'm going to get my job back. When is my life going to be normal? People can start to feel hopeless. And I also put another unpleasant symptom is that there can be a reduced sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And that, I think, oftentimes comes from a feeling of unproductivity, right? When we don't feel productive in our lives, we can feel a sense of low self-worth. So we look at people that are kind of going through this quarantine process, and many have felt a lack of motivation, common complaints of procrastination. There's no longer work-home separation, right? So people can't just like leave the work and leave their work at the office. They're doing it all in this one space. And then boredom. People are just complaining about boredom, that they've, I've heard people make jokes about, I've watched Netflix. Oh, what series? No, I've watched the entire Netflix. So people are very bored in this new kind of normal that we have. So that was a lot of talking. I'm gonna slow down here for a second. So I brought up this pie chart again, as everyone can see that. And I've put kind of what I've just spoke about of every single slice with some of those descriptions that I just kind of went through. And what I'm going to ask all of you to do, if you can, is maybe take a piece of paper or something, or at least mentally jot down in your head. But paper and writing it down would be easier, because I'm going to have you all try something, and I'm going to start us off to kind of show us what we're doing here. So when I talk about these different slices, from my own experience, I have felt anxiety or concern at some point this past 3-4 weeks about every single one of these, right? Unavoidable at some point. But what often happens is when we start to feel overwhelmed, we may not know or recognize which one is most pressing for us. We just think it's all ever consuming, right? So I'm going to say that I'm going to lead us into an exercise here for myself personally, to kind of start us off about what is most affecting me at this particular time. And by doing that, it's allowing me to take more, not responsibility, but more understanding and recognizing what where I need to put my attention most in order to make this more workable. And I'm so for myself, for example, and I give percentages as just an easy way to kind of do this. For me personally, contracting COVID-19 is about half of my worry, about 50%. And not really so much for myself, but more for my family, for my children. I have 2 young kids. There's been studies that kids can be silent carriers and it may not affect them, but there's still not enough evidence that it can be they're at all immune from it and they can still get severely sick. So this is, for me, about half of my worry is in this one slice here alone. I would say media leadership is another big one for me. Hearing mixed messages, I tend to do that scrolling of just panic scrolling, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but when the articles pop up, and this can be a huge chunk of it because I'm just looking at the numbers rising, and it's not good news. It's not good news, and that's just the reality of it. So this is about 25% of my anxiety right now. And then I look at the quarantine measures. I think sometimes this is probably about 15% of it. And for me, this is about just knowing when life's going to go back. You know, I don't know when I'll go back to work or school again, and this has left some confusion for just my family. My kids are going to go back to school. And then the remaining piece is about this 10%, which is about healthcare for me. I have very close friends who are in the medical field front lines right now, and I am concerned for their safety and their well-being. For myself personally, alhamdulillah, the economy is not really on my plate at the moment. Closures, not really too much of my concern. Basic sustenance, alhamdulillah, I don't really have to worry about this right now either. So it's really these 4. Media, quarantine, tracking the virus. Sorry, those 3 are kind of my big ones. So, and healthcare. So what I want you all to do, and I'll give you all just about 2 minutes of time, is identify which ones are most pressing for you right now. And you can label those in percentages or not, but just recognize that. And then if there's time for a little bit of Q&A and any questions, we can see people can share some of their reactions to what that was like for them to do this. And then we'll go directly into coping strategies, inshallah. Take another minute, and then we will continue. Okay, I'm gonna return back, and if you're still working on that, that's actually okay. But I want everyone to just be able to visually identify kind of what is this all about for everybody. And now we'll go into these coping strategies. So I put, so what can we do? So I've developed, and not me completely alone, I've talked to some good dear therapist friends, psychology friends, and found some pretty decent sources online of what I found to be 10 very helpful coping strategies. And I've put my own twist on most of them as well. So I don't take complete credit on that. A lot of other bright-minded folks have kind of come up with these, and I thank them in advance for that as well. So I'm just going to get right into these coping strategies, okay? So feel free to take notes. You can keep them for yourself. I don't know if Imam Hassan is going to put this up on YouTube, so you might be able to refer to it there. But without further ado, let's jump right into this. So number one, I put connection. It is extremely important to stay connected with people. So that means online, right? Or the ones we live with, but particularly the ones online that we can't always see. So I put sharing your honest joys, worries, boredom, humor, etc. with family and friends is very important right now. And I would say do this for at least 30 minutes every single day, every day. A thing that can help with that, if you feel unmotivated to want to check in with folks, is almost just creating a routine to do this regularly, even if you don't feel motivated to check in, because it actually will help. Just making that effort is important. Let me see here. So I also put, you can use FaceTime, Zoom, Facebook Messenger, phone calls, text. There's a plethora of different options to be able to talk with people. So there's never an excuse of why we can't do it. And then I put another important part of this that can help is you can set up virtual play dates with each other, or virtual meetups. So you can have dinner together with a friend or family, loved one. You can watch a show together. You can pray. You can meditate together. You can work out together. There's a lot of things that you can do to create kind of this connection of maybe just quote unquote hanging out, right? And then another part of that is when you are calling people and you are maybe providing comfort for them, I think just equally as important, it's important to provide comfort for others as well. By providing comfort to others, it also works to help us feel more comforted too. Number two, I put routine. So keep a consistent daily routine. This is extremely important as well. This includes waking up on time, the same time, creating a bedtime schedule, a work schedule, school and homework schedule, workout schedule. Routines keep us in flow. We are humans. We are naturally creatures of habit, and habit is important for us to feel productive and that we have a plan for our days. So you can also, it's important to schedule daily activities for your children too. Trust me, I have 2 children. Without some kind of scheduled daily activity, life can get pretty hard to create my own schedule. Even with their daily activities scheduled, it can still get in the way, but I'm telling you, it would completely get in the way if I didn't have something lined up for them as well. So some ideas for that can be creating activities, lessons plans, playtime, important. People need play. That goes for the adults as well, and quality time with your kids. I said have a partner, friend, roommate, or phone contact help you stay accountable and on schedule if you happen to feel unmotivated to do so yourself. Again, that peer accountability, that peer pressure is also important for that. I said number 3, be appropriately prepared. So for example, for food and water, have a necessary amount of food, water, medications, cleaning supplies. I looked up a lot of different opinions on this, and kind of the consensus that what I found was about people saying have about 2 to 3 weeks worth of food each trip. Now this is a very updated consensus that I found, because some people are going overboard, buying years worth, not buying enough, but from the overall consensus, about 2 to 3 weeks seemed about appropriate. And I would just make a note, avoid stockpiling, right? So avoid loading up on everything at the grocery store at once. Not only is it wasteful for yourself, but also for others who now can't get those necessities that they need for themselves. I think that's a really important lesson. And I've appreciated that a lot of the stores have senior citizen hour for them to get their groceries first or last without other people in the way, because we need to let everybody have a chance to get what they need to get. So example, and it's kind of a silly one. No human has ever needed 200 rolls of toilet paper, at least for even a year. That'd be over a half a roll a year. It's unnecessary. I put follow social distancing and quarantine measures. It actually works. Other countries that have done that strictly, the numbers went down. Now, unfortunately, some of those countries have had second waves of outbreak, but it is not nearly as severe as the initial outbreak, and it does work. It takes time. We may not see it being as productive because we don't have a hold of the numbers, and the tests now are being more available, but it is working, and we need to continue doing that. I said wash your hands a lot. Don't touch your face. Be mindful when you get groceries. Make exchanges with anyone. Recognize, and as you're doing this, if you have to go to the grocery store, you have to go to a mandatory appointment, whatever it may be, just recognize those internal mechanisms that I just discussed about of panic and anxiety, right? So the physical, the emotional, the cognitive, the behavioral, before and during your outings, right? because I think that we sometimes just go into it with a sense of panic, but if we can really try to hone in on what's going on for us, it can allow us to kind of slow down and be a bit more rational in our decision making. Number 4 I have is develop a self-care toolkit. So this can look a little bit different for everyone, but I say have a designated space and maybe in a physical case to practice and store healing items that you can always go to when feeling overwhelmed. This is important. I put some specific ideas, would look something like this, maybe even, it can vary. Having a journal, so being able to track your thoughts and emotions and not just limited to COVID-19. The beauty of having a journal and tracking some of your thoughts and emotions on a daily basis even is that you're able to kind of fact check what you felt earlier in the day. Oftentimes people say, I just felt scared, I was depressed all day. That's actually not always the case. You can track the good, the neutral, and maybe the bad experiences that you've had, and notice that our emotions oftentimes fluctuate, right? And often so throughout the day. I say have a trusted contact or two that you can always reach out to as part of your self toolkit, right? More than one contact, just in case you can't get a hold of that other person, but someone you can always just kind of lean on and discuss of what's going on or what's bothering you, what you need. I said prayer and meditation, right? So this is a very, very important one because it can allow us to kind of slow down, ground ourselves, kind of reset, and take a break from kind of the busyness and the world around us just for a few moments. I said books, read a lot of books. So that could be the Quran, that could be self-healing books, it could be fictional books, non-fictional books, whatever you feel drawn into. For me, myself personally, I'm reading one called The Alter Ego Effect by Todd Herman, and it talks about how we naturally, innately have like some kind of hero mindset within ourselves that we can use to be the best version of ourselves when things are difficult. It's a great book, The Alter Ego Effect. Tea and coffee. I said, who doesn't like tea and coffee, right? Put that in your self-care toolkit. And then meaningful photos. I've seen a lot of people reminiscing on family photos, having more of a reflective experience, more appreciative of their loved ones. So maybe having some of that as part of your toolkit as well. And then some people say aromatherapy and relaxing oils. I personally don't really do that, but there is a lot of empirical research that says that having kind of oils, lavender, lemongrass, rosewater, for example, especially rosewater I've seen, has healing properties and has really helped people alleviate some of their anxiety. So that can also be effective. And the next one I have is exercise. I said, or at least get some fresh air. Again, 30 minutes every single day. Get some kind of exercise every single day. We need it. We're stuck in the house all day. We need to move. Now, if you're worried about contact, right, with other people, then maybe try going first thing in the morning or later in the evening. And you can also try less traveled streets and avenues, right? And if you're still too concerned about going outside, then there's always YouTube videos that you can look at that offer free movement classes. The point is we need to be able to just move around a little bit and change our current experience of sitting around with whatever we're doing. Movement is very emotional. It helps. I put scheduled daily exercise for your children as well. They will really learn to appreciate it. So that includes playtime, family walk, and I said, you know, jokingly, but dance parties. My kids like Paw Patrol, and my son likes to dance the Paw Patrol theme songs. So just throwing that out there. And again, this peer pressure piece, have a partner, friend, roommate, or phone contact help keep you accountable on schedule if you feel unmotivated to exercise or do something. And like I said, you can even do the exercise with them via FaceTime or some other online communication. The next coping strategy is limit news/social media. Just limit it. And here's an unpopular opinion that I'm going to say, and I would really stress. Try taking a break from your news and social media for at least 1 hour straight throughout the day. So that's not 1 hour total. Just put it away for an hour and see what happens to yourself. Limiting news, social media in general is important. We avoid the panic scrolling, right? So I have social media. I see one article of COVID-19. This happens to me. I'm guilty of it. And the algorithms that are created are often related to the same topic on those social media platforms. So I'm looking at, now I'm at 10 different articles of COVID-19. and it's making my anxiety rise. We don't need to do that. Avoid panic scrolling. Read trusted sources as well. I had mentioned this a bit earlier, but false information is absolutely everywhere, and that does not help. That's unnecessary panic, unnecessary anxiety that we don't really need. So I would also say recognize those internal mechanisms. I keep going back to that, of anxiety, that physical, that emotional, that cognitive, behavioral, as you read and watch news and media, social media. And it's really important, take a break when those mechanisms become elevated or too distressing, right? And you can always go back to your self-care toolkit when that arises. And I just put, honestly, COVID-19 will be the main topic for the foreseeable future. So be informed about it, yes, right? Don't bury your head in the sand about the issues, but no need to exhaust ourselves each day excessively reading about it. Relational dynamics. So this is one that I think hits a bit closer to home for everybody, because we're all at home with, most of us are at home with our loved ones or ones we care about. So I did a lot of reading, a lot of different consensus of what is the best way to approach family, friends, roommates, whoever we're with. And this is the one I found that I thought was most helpful. It said, give everyone the benefit of the doubt right now. And what I mean by that is it's an uneasy time for all of us, right? We're all cooped up together. Emotions will flare up. That's actually perfectly normal and actually quite expected. So an important thing to do with that is, once you give everyone the benefit of the doubt, is to be able to find your own retreat space, right? Find your own place where you can just go. Try to find it before you have lost your cool, right? Before your distress tolerance has gone overboard. That's important, because once you've already lost your cool, it's much harder to regather your emotions, your mindset, to get back to square one or to get back to normal. So try to do it before you blow up. And some ideas for where to find your own retreat space can be a separate room or a space for work and relaxation. It can be a nature spot, it can be a garage, your backyard, in your car, in your own apartment or condo complex. Just find somewhere where you can gather yourself. And I said offer compassion and do it often. A little bit more compassionate than normal right now. We're going through a pretty serious crisis right now across the world. And I said, just remember, the people you're surrounded with also have their own fears and concerns, but they are in this together with you. So don't forget that. It can be easy too. Financial matters. So I want to make really upfront right away. I am not a financial advisor by any means. So I am not here to answer questions about that. But there are some basic, I think, common sense things that I can address that can be helpful for some people. So do what is within your control to try to stay financially safe, right? So with this new government bill and checks coming out for people under 100,000, if you set up direct deposit, if you have not already done so for your government check, it will expedite receiving that money. Basically, if your taxes have been filed to the IRS, you can have a direct deposit generally. But just to verify that, it'll get the time of your check within a lot quicker. You can file for unemployment insurance for those who have lost their job, right? This is something you can just do now. You can contact your loan agencies, your banks, wherever else you may owe money, to kind of freeze payments, right? People are freezing payments across the country right now. And I said utilize family and friends as additional support if feasible to do so. So if you are in some kind of financial bind, if you have that opportunity, that privilege, then you can always do that as well. I said do not engage in risky investments. I know of people who are putting all their money on a certain stock. The stock market is very in flux right now. So I would avoid doing that if you don't have the means or money to do that. And take a break from checking the stock market for those who do. I said it's been volatile all month and will likely continue for the foreseeable future. Mindfulness meditation. So meditation is a very secular, non-religious thing we can do in addition to prayer. This is across the world, across the country. There is a plethora of empirical research talking about the benefits of just sitting quietly, trying to slow down yourself. This is not religious, this is very secular, and it can be in addition to prayer. So it's basically mental training practice that teaches us to slow down our thoughts, let go of negativity, and calm our mind and our body. So I talked about that. There's hundreds, thousands of studies talking about the benefit of some kind of mindfulness meditation practice. So some examples, we'll talk about this first. About 10 to 20 minutes a day is what's generally required for it to be most effective. And of course, the longer can also be better. And some exercises include diaphragmatic breathing. So it's like belly breathing, big deep breaths. We can do guided imagery or visualization exercises, imagining ourselves on a beach, someplace that gives us some kind of peace and tranquility. And I talk about mindful walking as well. So you're really kind of slowing down the way you physically walk somewhere to just kind of be present and grounded in the present moment. I will provide, I have provided some resources at the end that talk about more about mindfulness meditation and the benefits of it and what to actually do. So something to think about as well. And then my last coping strategy says appreciate the good. Appreciate the good. Most information we receive is pretty scary, it's pretty overwhelming, and it's pretty negative. But there is also good news too with what's going on right now. So most people do successfully recover from COVID-19 that have been affected by it. There are many donation agencies where we can directly contribute in the supply for those in need of food, PPE equipment, and research, to try to help work on vaccinations and other tests. There's also a lot of heartwarming stories out there. I think people get caught up so much in the scary ones. If we look a little harder, there are some really heartwarming ones. And one I found talked about some COVID-19 survivors are donating their blood plasma that has antibodies that can help those who are seriously ill, help fight the disease to overcome it. Sorry about that. So this idea that there's a sense of compassion and connection, and these beautiful, heartwarming stories of how humanity can actually really be a great thing right now. And I put, if safe to do so, try to really embrace the moments that you get to spend with family, friends, and roommates, whether that's in person or online. This feels like a really long period of time, but I promise you it actually really isn't. So this can be a great opportunity to just find more appreciation and love with those who are most important to us. And I put lastly, explore your creativity. We have a lot more time to do it. So maybe you can do something that you've never done before. You can learn how to quilt. You can become a better cook. You can, whatever that may be, do something that you find creative, find enjoyment in, use your imagination. And then the very last thing, which isn't really my coping strategies, kind of is actually, I said focus on actual control. So focus on actual control, things that you can always do at any time. You have the power to do that. So that means you have the power to always stay connected. You can always create your own routine. You can be appropriately prepared. You can have a self-care toolkit readily available, right? You can always exercise. You can always limit your news and social media. You can be financially responsible and proactive. You can meditate and always pray. You can always donate and support to good causes or support ideas of good causes. And you can always appreciate the good. And if you catch the pattern here, this is the control you have of those 10 coping strategies that I just provided. So that is always available. That is always at your disposal. Try not to forget that. Okay, there's a lot of content. So what I'm going to do here is I provided some trusted sources for COVID-19 information, right? So I put the CDC, I put the WHO, World Health Organization, and then I put a couple of infectious disease experts, a physician, who their Twitter pages, they post very scientific articles, but they also post regular newsworthy articles as well, but ones that are actually very factual and honest, and these are experts in the field. So these are some great sources that I can share in the chat box if anyone is interested. And then I put some mental health resources right now. Mental health services are on high demand right now across the country. There's NAMI, contact number. You can find your local organization of NAMI with wherever you live. For Iowa City here, there's one in Johnson County. Grief and loss, there's a website for that for local groups within your area. The disaster distress helpline, which was provided from the CDC directly. I put the National Domestic Violence hotline. And you can always contact local psychologists and therapists in your area as well. Talk to your local religious leaders. And then a suicide hotline for anyone who is or knows or feels, really, really bad, really poorly. So there's mindfulness resources that I posted as well. Just the practice itself, what to do, kind of how to do it. And that's all I have. I'm open to questions, comments, thoughts. I very much appreciate your time, and please feel free to ask questions, talk about what happened with the pie chart. I'm open.
Thank you so much, Ramsey. This was actually really informative and very, very helpful. I appreciate everyone's joining in. We have about 22 people that stayed with us. So I appreciate everyone's patience and everyone's attentive attendance with us today. I also want to make sure that I note that you know, our Friday, as it is our Jum'ah prayer, as it is being suspended right now, will not always take the same kind of traditional way that it had. And so I really appreciate when people have the openness to listen to different topics, and as we try to help people throughout this time in any way possible, whether this is going to be spiritual or in a you know, having a mental health expert like Ramsey share with us, or we will be having other guests inshallah in the future. And so I wanted to thank Ramsey, and I wanted to thank everyone. So right now I want to open it for questions. If anyone here who has any questions, just let me know. You can unmute yourself and ask the questions, or you can type it in the chatting box. As we have Ramsey here still with us online. The session is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our YouTube, and I will share a link with everyone through our WhatsApp group. So we have people thanking you, Ramsey, and letting you know that it was a really good session. I second that. Any questions from the people who are still with us online? And if you have a question that perhaps you feel you don't want to ask, you know, kind of publicly, Ramsey, if you allow, I'm not really sure how you would like that, but if you let them know maybe your contact information, if that's something you're comfortable with, they can get in touch with you directly. You also have the option for the people who are still here, you have the option of sending a message to him here. Ramsey just shared his email with us. You have the option of sending a message privately, so he will get the question and people won't know who asked the question. But otherwise, you know, I really thank you, and I want to share one more time the dua I started with, as if people perhaps think about any questions they have. The two du'as I sent earlier, they kind of go in line with some of the things that that Ramsey shared, whether it is praying together in the form of making dua together or praying together as a family when you are at home. This is a great time for you to be praying at home and to connect spiritually and otherwise with your family. This dua goes in line with what Ramsey said about focusing on the things we can control and letting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, relying on Allah for all the things we cannot control. For instance, when this dua says, Allahumma inni bika minal-hammi wal-hazan, or al-hammi wal-Ḥuzni, wal-ajazi wal-kasli wal-bukhli wal-jubni ḍala'id-dayni ghalabatir-rijal, that you seek refuge in Allah from things that you really don't have control over, your feelings, your emotion and anxiety and sorrow, weakness, miserliness, cowardice. All of these are things that perhaps we don't have great control over, and so we rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take control over them, and to you know, to the other hadith where it says, you rectify all of my affairs. Allah, you manage all of my affairs, so don't give me or don't leave me for myself, because we cannot control everything. But there are things that we can control, and many of them are things that Ramsey today shared with us, whether it is having your personal toolkit, emotional toolkit, or you know, being connected with people, and many of the other things that he shared today. So if you do not have, really appreciate efforts by both Imam Hassan and Brother Ramsey. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you. We appreciate you attending today. If people don't have questions, inshallah, we'll end the session for today. Thank you. Jazakumullah khair, everyone. Please, before we end the meeting, make sure you take Ramsey's email and send him any questions that you have, or just send him thank you notes for his time. Hopefully we don't have to endure this for a longer period of time, but if we have to, I'm sure Ramsey will be back and share with us more of his knowledge on how to stay strong and resilient emotionally and mentally during this time. Jazakumullah khair, everyone. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Ramsey, barakallahu feek. Thank you. May Allah bless you and bless your family and increase you in beneficial knowledge and continue to use you as a way of supporting and helping people.
Ameen. Shukran. Alhamdulillah. Shukran.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.